Captain Kest X9's crystalline form sparkled with professional menace as he observed the primitive, blue-green planet through the quantum telescope array. His geometric features arranged themselves into what his species considered a fearsome scowl, though to most other life forms it looked more like a disco ball having an existential crisis. "Status report," he chimed, his crystalline voice creating a musical ripple through the command deck. Lieutenant Vix R7, whose form was slightly less impressive due to an unfortunate incident involving space coffee and thermal shock, straightened to attention. "The Precision Strike Force is ready, sir. All warriors have achieved optimal geometric alignment and our weapons are charged to maximum destructive capacity." Throughout the ship, rows of crystalline warriors polished their photon lances with molecular-grade cleaning crystals. The antimatter cannons hummed with barely contained apocalyptic energy. Everything was perfectly calculated, precisely calibrated, and absolutely lethal. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen was having what she professionally termed a geological clusterfuck. "Fred," she addressed the particularly interesting granite specimen in her hand, "I think we're lost." She paused, studying the rock's feldspar composition. "No offense, but your sense of direction is terrible." The GPS unit clipped to her belt had given up an hour ago, displaying the extremely helpful message, "Location, somewhere with rocks." Her phone had no signal, her water bottle was running low, and she'd just discovered that what she thought was a trail marker was actually just a weirdly shaped bush. "At least I found you," she told Fred, carefully wrapping the granite sample in protective paper. "You're a beautiful example of igneous intrusion, much better company than my last research assistant. He tried to organize my samples by color. Color, can you believe it?" Sarah adjusted her rock hammer in its holster, a custom-made tool belt that her colleagues had nicknamed the Geology gunslinger. She'd added rhinestones to lean into the theme. Back in orbit, Captain Kazet X9 was delivering his pre-invasion speech. "Warriors of the Crystalline Hegemony, today we bring our superior technology to this primitive world. Our photon lances will—" "Sir," interrupted Lieutenant Vix R7, "we're picking up some unusual readings from the target area." "What kind of readings?" "Well, there appears to be a single human female talking to a rock." The captain's geometric patterns shifted in confusion. "Talking to a rock?" "Yes, sir, she appears to have named it Fred." Captain Kazut X9's crystalline form clouded slightly. After 15 successful planetary conquests, he'd never encountered this particular scenario in the invasion manual. "Perhaps," he chimed uncertainly, "we should revise our tactical approach." "Too late, sir," Vix R7 reported. "The warriors are already excited about using their new weapons. Besides, how much trouble could one human with a rock cause?" The universe, which has a particularly ironic sense of humor, decided this would be an excellent moment to start taking notes. The Hegemony's landing ships descended through Earth's atmosphere with mathematical precision, their crystal hulls refracting sunlight in a deliberately intimidating display. Captain Kazit X9 had spent 3 solar cycles choreographing this entrance. The formation was perfect, the lighting was menacing, and the ominous humming was pitch perfect. And then they landed on the shale deposit. "Behold, primitive Earth creature, we are wah-wah-wah." Captain Kazit X9's dramatic entrance speech turned into a crystalline shriek as his perfectly aligned geometric feet encountered the loose, flaky sedimentary rock. His warriors, emerging in formation behind him, suffered a similar fate. The elite precision strike force suddenly became the elite precision slip and slide, their crystalline forms creating a symphony of panic chiming as they struggled for balance. Sarah Chen looked up from her notebook where she'd been sketching Fred's particularly interesting mineral banding. "Oh, hey! You must be from the Geology Department's grad student production of Space Rocks the Musical. Love the costumes." 3 warriors tumbled past her, their photon lances firing randomly into the air. Sarah ducked absently, more concerned about protecting Fred from the commotion. "Those are amazing crystals you're wearing," she continued, pulling a first aid kit from her pack. "Though you might want to reconsider the footwear choices. This is a Type 3 shale deposit with a friction coefficient of, well, you're discovering that firsthand. Want some band-aids?" Captain Kazit X9 finally regained his footing, his crystalline form vibrating with embarrassment and rage. "We are not graduate students. We are the Crystalline Hegemony's elite precision strike force, here to conquer your primitive world." Fascinating crystal structure you've got there, Sarah interrupted, squinting at his geometric patterns. Would you say you're closer to cubic or hexagonal crystallization? And what's your Mohs hardness rating? What? No, I am attempting to deliver a conquest speech. Ahem, your pathetic world will bow before our superior. Is that piezoelectric response I'm seeing in your structure? The way you're glowing when you get agitated? Sarah had pulled out her field notebook and was sketching rapidly. Could you get angry again? I want to document the luminescence patterns. The warriors exchanged confused glances, their photon lances drooping uncertainly. One whispered to another, "Is this standard human conquest protocol?" "Silence," X9 chimed forcefully, creating a brief light show. "I am Captain X9 and you will..." X9, is that a reference to your crystal lattice configuration? Because I'm seeing what looks like a ninefold symmetry in your core structure, which is absolutely fascinating from a mineralogical perspective. Would you mind if I took some measurements? No measurements, the captain's form flashed in frustration. We are here to demonstrate our superior technology and force your surrender. Sarah had pulled out her rock hammer and was making notes about the warrior's light refraction patterns. Speaking of technology, those weapons are incredible. The energy containment must require some sort of advanced crystalline matrix. Would you say it's more like a modified quartz structure or something entirely novel? Also, you're standing on an unstable rock formation again. This warning came too late for Lieutenant Vix R7, who had been trying to sneak up behind Sarah with his photon lance. The shale shifted, sending him sliding past her with a musical yelp. See, that's why proper field gear is essential. Sarah looked around at the scattered warriors, many still struggling with the treacherous terrain. You know, for an elite precision strike force, you guys seem a bit unprepared for basic geological conditions. Did nobody do a site survey? Check the rock formations? Basic terrain analysis? Captain X9's geometric patterns had shifted from threatening to something closer to a migraine. We are not here for a geology lesson. We are here to... Oh my God, Sarah interrupted again, her eyes wide with sudden realization. Are you guys actually aliens? Real crystalline life forms? She grabbed her sample collection kit. This is amazing. I have so many questions about your mineral composition. Do you mind if I take a small sample for science? The captain watched in horror as his fearsome warriors began backing away from the excited geologist and her sampling kit. This was definitely not in the invasion manual. Enough! Captain X9's crystalline form pulsed with what he hoped was intimidating light. We will now demonstrate the futility of resistance. He turned to his least disheveled warriors. Destroy something. 3 warriors raised their photon lances, took careful aim at a nearby boulder field, and fired. The advanced weapons hummed with destructive energy, transforming the ancient rocks into superheated plasma that dissipated into the air with a satisfying whoosh. The captain waited for the expected screams of terror. Instead, he heard something that sounded suspiciously like sniffling. Those, Sarah's voice quavered as she stared at the empty space where the rocks had been. Those were Precambrian metamorphic formations. Do you have any idea how old they were? Her hands clutched Fred the granite protectively to her chest. They had perfect examples of foliation patterns. Yes, tremble before our... They were billions of years old. Sarah's professional composure cracked like a geode under pressure. Those rocks survived multiple extinction events, tectonic shifts, and all of Earth's major geological periods, just to be vaporized by a bunch of walking crystals with impulse control issues. The warriors shifted uncomfortably, their geometric patterns displaying what might have been embarrassment. One whispered to another, "Should we apologize to the rocks?" Sarah was now pacing, gesturing wildly with her rock hammer. Do you people have any concept of geological preservation? Any respect for Earth's geological heritage? Those formations could have contained crucial data about our planet's early development. We are here to conquer your world, not preserve it. X9 attempted to regain control of the situation. Behold, as we demonstrate more of our power. Don't you dare vaporize another rock. Sarah stepped between the warriors and a particularly promising outcrop. This site hasn't even been properly documented yet. Where's your research permit? Your environmental impact assessment, your geological survey authorization? Lieutenant Vix R7 leaned toward his captain. Sir, should we have filed for permits before invading? We are conquering invaders. We don't need permits. Sarah's eyes narrowed dangerously. Oh, so you're not just destroying irreplaceable geological formations, you're doing it without proper documentation. The warriors watched in confusion as she pulled out a thick manual titled International Guidelines for Geological Site Preservation and began aggressively flipping through pages. Section 3, Paragraph 2, she read loudly. All activities potentially impacting sites of geological significance must be preceded by thorough documentation and impact analysis. Do you see this? She thrust the manual toward the nearest warrior. There are forms you need to fill out. But we have superior weapons, one warrior chimed uncertainly. We're supposed to be terrifying. You know what's terrifying? Sarah pulled out her laptop. The amount of geological data you just obliterated. Here, look at these spreadsheets. Captain Kazut, X9, watched in horror as his elite warriors, armed with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, found themselves being lectured about proper geological documentation procedures by an increasingly agitated human. And another thing, Sarah had moved on to a PowerPoint presentation she happened to have ready. The ethical implications of destroying geological formations without proper study. I have 37 slides on this topic alone. Sir, Lieutenant Vix R7 whispered urgently, the warriors are starting to take notes. Indeed, several members of the elite precision strike force had produced data crystals and were recording Sarah's increasingly passionate explanation of stratigraphic principles and preservation protocols. This is unacceptable, Kazut, X9 chimed loudly. We are fearsome conquerors, not geology students. Warriors, prepare to... Pop quiz, Sarah interrupted. Who can tell me the proper procedures for documenting a site before any potentially destructive activities? 3 warriors raised their hands. The captain's geometric patterns shifted into what could only be described as a crystalline facepalm. We are the most feared invasion force in the galaxy, he muttered, reduced to attending an impromptu geology lecture. Now, Sarah continued, pulling out more documentation, let's talk about the importance of maintaining detailed field notes. I have some extra notebooks here. As his warriors scrambled to accept the offered notebooks, Captain Kazut, X9, began to suspect that this invasion might not go according to plan. In the distance, he could hear Sarah beginning a detailed explanation of proper sample labeling techniques, and worse, his warriors seemed interested. Sir, Lieutenant Vix R7 approached hesitantly. Should we be writing this down? The captain's response was lost in the sound of Sarah opening another PowerPoint presentation, this one titled Rock Classification, a Comprehensive Overview, Part 1 of 47. Sarah paused mid-lecture about metamorphic rock classification, her eyes suddenly widening as she really looked at her captive audience. Wait a minute, you're not wearing costumes. Your crystalline structure is actually part of your biological form. The warriors straightened proudly, finally feeling recognized as the fearsome beings they were. This is amazing, Sarah scrambled for her analytical tools. You're genuine crystalline life forms. The implications for biomineralogy are staggering. Quick, what's your primary crystal system? Orthorhombic, tetragonal. Do you undergo phase transitions with temperature changes? We are fearsome warriors of the... Kazut X9 began, but was cut off by Sarah pressing a refractometer against his arm. Fascinating, your refractive index is off the charts, she scribbled frantically in her notebook. Do you mind if I test your cleavage planes? My what? The captain backed away, his geometric patterns rearranging into what might have been a blush. Your structural planes of weakness, although... She circled him with professional interest. Your formation appears to be remarkably uniform. Could you shatter a small piece for me to analyze? We do not shatter pieces of ourselves for primitive humans. Kazut, X9's voice chimed with indignation. What about just a tiny flake? For science? Sarah had produced an alarming array of sampling tools. I promise to use proper preservation techniques. The warriors huddled together protectively, their photon lances pointed outward like a crystalline porcupine. One whispered, Sir, she's got a rock hammer and she knows how to use it. Sarah was now consulting a mineralogy textbook. Your structure doesn't match any known crystal system. This could be a breakthrough paper. How do you maintain lattice integrity during space travel? What's your response to piezoelectric stress? Can I test your hardness? We are here to conquer, not participate in your research. Kazut, X9 tried to sound authoritative while dodging Sarah's attempts to perform a streak test on his elbow. But think of the scientific implications. We could co-author a paper. Sarah's eyes gleamed with academic fervor. When was your last structural analysis? Any signs of strain or fracturing? How do you handle thermal shock? Lieutenant Vix R7 raised a hesitant hand. I actually had some thermal shock issues with space coffee last week. Traitor! Kazat X9 chimed, but it was too late. Sarah had already whipped out a microscope. Show me, this could provide crucial data about your structural resilience. Do you have any before and after crystallographic images? What was the temperature differential? Did you document the recovery process? The warriors watched in horror as Vix R7 found himself participating in an impromptu case study of crystalline beverage incidents. Sir, one warrior chimed nervously, she's taking out more sampling equipment. Indeed, Sarah had assembled what appeared to be a mobile geology lab. Now, about those samples, I'm thinking thin sections, X-ray diffraction analysis, maybe some electron microscopy. Kazat X9 stared at his photon lance, questioning every life decision that had led to this moment. They had come to demonstrate superior technology and military might. Instead, his elite force was being treated like a particularly interesting mineral deposit. Look, Sarah said reasonably, pulling out grant application forms, I can get funding for this research. Think of the publications, the conference presentations. You could revolutionize the field of xenomineralogy. We are not research subjects, Kazat X9 protested. We are… Wait, did you say funding? Full grant funding, Sarah nodded, plus co-author credits and conference speaking fees. Several warriors perked up noticeably at this, their crystalline forms shimmering with interest. Sir, Lieutenant Vix R7 whispered, our research budget was cut last cycle. No, Kazat X9's patterns swirled with frustration. We are fearsome conquerors. We will not be distracted by… He paused, looking at the grant figures Sarah was writing down. Is that per cycle? Plus expenses, Sarah added, already filling out IRB forms. Now, about those samples. The captain watched helplessly as his warriors began discussing publication possibilities and academic credentials. One was already drafting an abstract. I joined the elite precision strike force to conquer worlds, Kazat X9 muttered to himself, not to become a research paper. Sarah, now setting up specialized scanning equipment, called out cheerfully, Who wants to volunteer for crystallographic analysis? I promise to cite you in the methodology section. 3 warriors immediately raised their hands. Enough! Kazat X9's form pulsed with rainbow frustration. If you're so interested in studying us, you can do it as our prisoner. Warriors, seize her! The elite precision strike force moved to surround Sarah, who was busy measuring the angle of their crystal facets with a goniometer. Oh good, you're coming back to the ship, Sarah beamed, completely missing the menace in their approach. I assume you have a proper laboratory? Scanning electron microscope? X-ray crystallography equipment? We have detention cells, Kazat X9 announced triumphantly, with force fields. Force fields, fascinating. Are they crystal-based too? What's their energy transmission mechanism? Do you mind if I take readings? Sarah was already pulling out more equipment. The warriors activated their personal transport crystals, preparing to teleport their prisoner to the ship. Instead of the usual efficient molecular transfer, however, their crystals emitted a sound suspiciously like a dial-up modem having a seizure. Huh, Sarah noted, examining the failing crystals. You're getting some serious interference patterns there, probably because of the local geological conditions. Our technology is perfect, Kazat X9 protested, smacking his malfunctioning transport crystal. This has never happened before. Well, you're trying to operate crystalline technology in an area with high concentrations of competing mineral matrices, Sarah explained, slipping into lecture mode. See these rock formations? They're creating a natural interference field. It's actually quite similar to how piezoelectric crystals… Silence, warriors, use your photon lancers. The warriors raised their weapons, which promptly began making sounds like wind chimes in a blender. Oh yeah, Sarah nodded, pulling out geological survey maps. You're definitely going to have problems with those too. This whole area is riddled with mineral deposits that would affect crystal-based technology. Here, let me show you the stratigraphic analysis. We don't need a stratigraphic analysis, Kazat X9's voice cracked like a crystal under pressure. We need our weapons to work. Well, if you'd done proper geological surveys before invading… Sarah pulled up more PowerPoint slides. See this layer here? It's creating electromagnetic interference that's probably disrupting your crystal lattice alignment. And these deposits, they're generating competing resonance frequencies. Lieutenant Vix R7 squinted at the geological charts. Sir, she might have a point. Our readings are showing significant degradation in our crystal matrices. Not you too, X9 groaned. Just grab her physically. The warriors advanced, only to find their crystalline forms moving sluggishly. That'll be the magnetic properties of the magnetite deposits, Sarah explained helpfully. They're affecting your molecular structure. Really, this is basic geological interaction theory. Would you like to see my thesis on crystal response to geological electromagnetic fields? No more theses. X9 tried to maintain his menacing pose while his left arm refused to move properly. Why isn't anything working? Sarah had switched to her teaching voice. Well, if we look at the geological cross-section of this area. She pulled out a detailed diagram. You've basically landed in the worst possible location for crystal-based technology. These rock formations are creating a natural dampening field. It's actually quite fascinating from a research perspective. The warriors, now moving like crystalline sloths, watched in horror as their advanced technology continued to malfunction spectacularly. One warrior's photon lance started playing what sounded suspiciously like elevator music. I can explain the exact mechanisms if you'd like, Sarah offered, already preparing another presentation. I have some excellent diagrams about mineral crystal interactions and their effects on energy transmission. Sir, Lieutenant Vix-R7 reported, his form flickering like a disco ball with bad wiring. Our ship's systems are also showing signs of degradation. Apparently we're directly over a major mineral deposit. Of course you are, Sarah pulled out geological survey maps. This entire area is famous for its complex mineral structures. That's why I'm here studying it. Would you like to see my collection of core samples? X9 watched as his fearsome warriors struggled with basic movement, their crystals refracting light in increasingly random patterns. One warrior had started inadvertently playing what appeared to be a crystal-based version of Never Gonna Give You Up. Perhaps, Sarah suggested, pulling out her field notebook, this would be a good time to discuss proper site selection protocols for crystal-based operations. I have several peer-reviewed papers on the subject. No more papers, X9 tried to raise his arm dramatically but only managed a weak sparkle. We are the elite precision strike force. We will not be defeated by basic geological principles, Sarah offered helpfully. You know, this would make an excellent case study. How do you feel about participating in a research project about the effects of mineral deposits on crystalline life forms? The captain watched in despair as several of his warriors, now basically immobile, began discussing potential research methodologies with their supposed prisoner. Just think, Sarah continued enthusiastically, we could document the entire failure of your invasion from a geological perspective. It would make an amazing conference presentation. Sir, Vix-R7 reported, his voice fluctuating between bass and soprano. The ship's crystals are starting to resonate with the local mineral deposits. We're picking up what appears to be karaoke frequencies. From orbit, the mighty warship of the Crystalline Hegemony began broadcasting Sweet Caroline across all frequencies. Sarah beamed at her unwilling research subjects. Now, who wants to help me collect data on crystal degradation patterns? I have charts. The universe, still taking notes, was thoroughly enjoying itself. Backed against the cliff edge, Sarah continued her nervous habit of tossing and catching Fred the granite sample, completely ignoring the menacing, if somewhat wobbly, crystalline warriors surrounding her. Look, she said, catching Fred for the dozenth time, if you'd just let me run some basic compositional analysis on your crystal structures. Enough! X9 advanced, his form flickering like a malfunctioning Christmas decoration. You will surrender now, or... He paused, noticing an odd sensation every time Sarah's rock went up and down. His crystalline structure seemed to be humming. Lieutenant Vix-R7 felt it too. Sir, something's wrong. My lattice alignment feels ticklish. Sarah caught Fred again, and the entire elite precision strike force shuddered in unison. Her geologist's brain, which had been processing multiple observations in the background while she chatted about mineral compositions, suddenly connected several very interesting dots. Oh, she said softly, looking at Fred with new appreciation. Oh, that's fascinating. She held the granite sample up to eye level, examining its mineral composition with renewed interest. The warriors unconsciously leaned away from it. You know, she said conversationally, this particular granite sample has some really unusual properties. The specific arrangement of quartz, feldspar, and several rare earth elements creates a unique crystalline matrix that... No more geology lectures, Kazut X9 interrupted, though he couldn't stop his form from vibrating every time she moved the rock. Actually, Sarah continued, now tossing Fred with more purpose, this might be the most important geology lecture of your life. See, Fred here isn't just any granite. He's from a formation that underwent some very specific conditions during crystallization. The pressure, temperature, and mineral content created a natural resonance frequency that... The warriors watched in growing horror as their forms began to sparkle and chime in harmony with each toss of the rock. "Stop that," Kazut X9 commanded, his voice wavering between octaves. "It's basically like an opera singer shattering a wine glass," Sarah explained, warming to her subject. "Except instead of a high C, it's the specific resonance frequency of this granite's crystal structure. And instead of wine glasses," she smiled, "well, you're feeling it, aren't you?" The warriors were indeed feeling it. Their perfectly aligned crystal matrices were vibrating sympathetically with each movement of Fred, creating a cascading harmonic effect that was decidedly uncomfortable. "Sir," Vix R7 reported nervously, "our structural integrity is showing signs of... Wait, are we harmonizing?" The elite precision strike force had begun producing an involuntary crystalline chorus as their forms resonated with the granite's frequency. "The really interesting part," Sarah continued, now bouncing Fred like a conductor's baton, "is how the rare earth elements in this sample amplify the effect. It's creating a kind of geological feedback loop that..." "Cease this at once," Kazut X9 ordered, though his voice had risen to a musical soprano. "I don't think I will," Sarah replied, her inner scientist thoroughly enjoying this unexpected experiment. "You see, you threatened my research site, destroyed irreplaceable geological samples, and didn't even file the proper paperwork. As a dedicated geologist, I simply can't let that slide." She held Fred up dramatically. The warriors cowered, their forms tinkling in terror. "Now," she announced, "let's discuss the terms of your surrender. I want full access to your ship's laboratory equipment, detailed scans of your crystalline biology, and," she grinned, "co-author credits on all resulting papers." "You wouldn't," Kazut X9 whispered, his structure vibrating like a tuning fork. Sarah bounced Fred once, creating a ripple of harmonic distress through the assembled warriors. Several began to develop small cracks. "Try me," she said. "I once spent 6 months living in a tent to document a single rock formation. How long do you think I'll spend studying an entire army of crystalline aliens?" The warriors looked at their captain. The captain looked at the rock. The rock, being a rock, maintained a geological poker face. "Perhaps," Kazut X9 said carefully, his voice still several octaves too high, "we could discuss those research proposals you mentioned earlier." Sarah smiled and started pulling out grant applications. Behind her, the sun set dramatically on the cliff face, creating rainbow refractions through the thoroughly humbled crystalline army. Fred, still in her hand, sparkled with what might have been smugness. "Before we conclude today's interaction," Sarah announced, holding Fred at precisely calculated angle, "I'd like to share one final geological principle. It's about harmonic resonance in crystalline structures." "No more lectures," Kazut X9 screamed, his voice creating a perfect A-sharp. "You see," Sarah continued, professionally ignoring the panic among her audience, "when you combine specific mineral frequencies with the right amplitude and geometric orientation," she began moving Fred in a precise pattern, "the resulting harmonics can create a cascading resonance effect." The warriors tried to retreat, but their crystalline forms were now fully synchronized with Fred's geological frequency. They could only watch, chiming in helpless harmony, as Sarah demonstrated her point with devastating academic thoroughness. "It's quite similar to how waves amplify in certain geological formations," she explained, building up to her big finish. "For example, if I were to introduce a specific vibrational pattern at exactly the right angle." "Stop her!" Kazut X9 ordered, but his warriors were too busy vibrating in 3-part harmony to respond. "Really, you should have done your geological homework," Sarah sighed. "Basic site survey would have revealed the risks of bringing crystal-based technology into an area with these particular mineral compositions." She wound up for the throw, mentally calculating trajectory and impact angles. "I'd like to thank you all for participating in this impromptu demonstration of applied geological principles." "Wait!" Lieutenant Vix R7 chimed desperately. "What about the research papers?" "Oh, don't worry," Sarah assured him. "I'll still be doing plenty of research." She smiled. "The samples will just be a bit smaller." With perfect form developed through years of fieldwork, Sarah launched Fred in a textbook demonstration of geological cause and effect. The granite sample arced through the air, its crystal matrix singing a pure note that caught the sunlight just so. The elite precision strike force had one moment to appreciate the scientific elegance of their defeat before physics took over. The resulting crystalline chain reaction was spectacular. Warriors shattered in sequence, their perfect forms dissolving into cascading rainbow fragments that caught the light like nature's own fireworks display. The air filled with musical notes as each warrior broke apart in harmony with the others. Fascinating diffraction patterns, Sarah noted, already pulling out sample collection bags. The way the crystalline structures break along their natural cleavage planes is just beautiful. Kazit, X9, his form disintegrating into precisely sized fragments, had just enough time to realize that they would indeed end up in a research paper, just not quite in the way they'd planned. The last thing he heard was Sarah's voice, bright with scientific enthusiasm. "This is going to make an amazing dissertation chapter." As the crystal dust settled, Sarah methodically began collecting samples, carefully labeling each bag with precise locations and timestamps. She picked up Fred, brushed him off, and added him to her sample kit with special honors. "And that," she told her granite friend, "is why we always do proper geological surveys before starting any project." The paper's title read, "Applied Harmonic Resonance in Extraterrestrial Crystalline Entities, a Case Study in Defensive Mineralogy." Below it, Sarah had carefully listed her co-authors. Sarah Chen, Ph.D., Fred, Granite Sample #GR 2024-147, and Kazit, X9, currently in partial reassembly. The peer review comments were interesting. Unprecedented methodology. Unusual application of basic geological principles. Please confirm this isn't an elaborate joke. Are those really alien crystal fragments in the supplementary materials? The Crystalline Hegemony's surrender document arrived on official letterhead that sparkled in the light. It came with an addendum requesting immediate geological consulting services to prevent further resonance-based incidents. Sarah sat in her newly expanded laboratory, surrounded by sophisticated alien equipment and carefully labeled samples of her former opponents. Kazit, X9, mostly reassembled except for a few pieces that kept playing Sweet Caroline, stood nearby holding a clipboard. "Today's agenda," Sarah announced cheerfully, "includes structural analysis of warrior-class crystal matrices, resonance frequency mapping, and," she smiled at her assistant, "your performance review." Kazit X9's remaining fragments chimed in distress. "I was a fleet captain, and now you're a research assistant with excellent first-hand knowledge of crystalline alien biology," Sarah replied, checking her notes, "though your sample labeling could use work." The former captain watched as his warriors, now enthusiastic geology students, filed into the lab for their weekly seminar. The Hegemony's generous research grant had funded a complete geological research facility, though Sarah insisted on keeping certain earth tools, especially her rock hammer. "Remember," Sarah addressed the group, "next week's topic is Proper Protocols for Planetary Invasion, a Geological Perspective. I expect detailed site surveys and environmental impact assessments from each of you." The warriors nodded earnestly, their partially reassembled forms sparkling with academic enthusiasm. "Also," she added, pulling out Fred, who now sported a tiny honorary doctorate medallion, "we'll be discussing defensive applications of common rock types. For those of you still missing pieces, attendance is mandatory." Kazit X9 sighed, creating a pleasant G minor chord. His performance review noted that while his crystal structure was impressively resilient, his filing system was chaotic, and his attitude toward proper sample documentation needs improvement. Still, as he watched Sarah excitedly prepare for another research session, he had to admit, being a geology research assistant was more interesting than planetary conquest. Even if she did insist on using him as a practical example in her lectures about crystal fracture patterns. "Oh, and Kazit X9, Sarah called out, "the Geological Society wants us to present at their annual conference. I hope you're ready for some public speaking." The former captain's fragments played a few nervous notes of "Don't Stop Believin'," as he realized that in the end, the real invasion had been the geological knowledge they gained along the way. Fred sparkled smugly on his display pedestal, his honorary doctorate catching the light just so.